Okay, good evening, everyone. It's 5:05. The meeting is officially open. The purpose of the meeting is to update on the Springfield Public School demographic data. So I think it's my time to give the floor to Matt. Is that appropriately?
First, I'll take a roll call because it's a Zoom meeting.
Okay.
Ms. Perez?
Present.
Ms. Hurst, absent, and Ms. Naylor?
Present.
Hi, Ms. Naylor.
How are you?
Fine. So now we could continue, correct?
Yep.
Yes.
For the record, we have a quorum.
All righty, I'm going to share my screen here.
Thanks, Matt.
Sure. All right, so we are here this evening to share an update on some of our demographic data and strategies from the 2019-2020 school year. I want to note before we start that there is a correction in the slides that were sent in the binders. There were a few grammatical errors, specifically in some of the charts that showed the word nation instead of Springfield, but they were updated in the invite, and we'll make sure you have the updated slides. And so I also want to note before we jump into the strategies and the recent data and talk about next steps, anything that you see here throughout the presentation in green indicates that it was a new addition in the 2019-2020 school year. Some of this information may seem repetitive because, again, this is an ongoing effort to diversify the teacher efforts. And so some of the information that we share this evening is just a continuation of the work that we've done in the past. And I would be remiss to say, if I didn't say that this is certainly a collaborative effort between district administration, the SEA, our newly formed DIRE committee, and of course the school committee, as we look to increasing the racial diversity of our educator workforce. So we thought it was important to add a call to action to this presentation into our efforts. So this is something that's new that we hadn't had in the presentation in the past, but really wanted to zero in on the why behind the work that we're doing around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'll let you look this over for a few seconds and just really want to highlight that it's grounded in student-centered voice and making sure that all of our efforts to diversify our educator workforce are grounded in the belief that all students deserve an excellent education. And so our call to action here is to really commit to making sure that we move the district forward in living out that promise. And so the plan for tonight is just to talk through some of the strategies, share some of the updated data, and then talk about next steps. And of course, this is all born out of our Springfield Promise, particularly that third bullet to attract knowledgeable, highly effective, and diverse educators and staff who want to work in a high-performing district. Everything that we've done over the past year and prior, ever since Superintendent Warwick's tenure has been to make sure that we're living out that promise. And so why are we here and why are we talking about effective and diverse staff, right? We know, and all the literature shows, that teacher quality is the key determinant of student success, and that increase in the racial diversity of the educator workforce is a strategy to help improve learning for all students, particularly students of color. But we know that when educators of color are present, everybody benefits. And so the growing body of literature over the past few decades suggests that teachers of color benefit school children. When teachers of color are present in front of school children, we see lower rates of school suspension and discipline, increased recommendations into gifted programs and honors programs. And again, across the board, we see great benefits for that, including that last bullet there. Students who have a teacher of color or have two teachers of color throughout their K-12 experience are 32% more likely to go to college. We also know that there is a critical shortage in the teaching profession nationally, and of course locally as well. Teacher shortages have been reported across the United States in recent years. And again, zeroing in on that third bullet, it's actually predicted that the shortage could almost double by 2025, going up to about 200,000. So we're in dire straits here and really need to be strategic in how do we bring in the most effective educators for our children. And so in Springfield here, we follow the recommended strategies that the National Education Association and many other organizations have really identified and pinpoint what are the barriers to increasing the racial diversity of educators in the workforce. And that's everything from burnout and frustration to the MTEL test here in Massachusetts, to looking at the declining number of students who are actually enrolled in traditional educator prep programs. And so using these different reasons, if you will, as to why the teacher diversity issue continues to persist, we in Springfield have adopted a number of different strategies, which I'll get into specifically in the next few slides, to try to increase the diversity of our workforce. And as I mentioned earlier, this is certainly a collaborative effort amongst many stakeholders. So some of the strategies that we've employed over the past few years: hiring earlier, making sure that we're expanding our brand and our recruitment presence, both online and in person. We've really ramped up our Grow Your Own programs, from Paraprofessional Pipeline to student to teacher pipelines, looking at alternative certification programs. And of course, we know that none of this matters. None of the recruitment efforts are fruitful unless we also address retention. And so we'll share some of those this evening as well. And so what have we done? Again, over the past several years, we focused on improving our hiring timeline, and that's determining allocations by building. So those meetings actually happen in early February with the chief schools officers, building principals, our HR analysts, and financial analysts, to really determine what positions will be available so we can get them posted and filled as early as possible. We've also negotiated earlier internal transfer processes, which allows us to post building-specific positions as early as April, so folks can apply to those positions that they qualify for. We've also strategized around the actual hiring process and put some safeguards in place to ensure that we're ensuring equitable, consistent process across the various schools in our district. And so that starts with recruitment from our office, everything through the application process, screening and vetted for those qualities that we know educators need, both those determined by DESE and that we just know are great teaching practices, interview processes, and then final selection and approval. In terms of the recommended strategy of expanding our online efforts and branding, over the past year, we've improved a number of processes that we've used in the past. Specifically, again, I want to zero in on the words that you see in green there. So we've updated our talent acquisition webpage to make it more user-friendly, to include information on student loan forgiveness, information on why Springfield's a great city to live and to work in. We've joined a number of different online job boards that are specific to the BIPOC community. So TFANet is Teacher America's national network. So there are over 50,000 active users and job searchers on that. So we post all our positions on there now. Idealist is a social justice organization that tends to attract more progressive, social justice minded folks. So we have a strong presence on Idealist. EdLock is the Educator and Leaders of Color online platform, and HBCU Connect is the platform that many historic Black and brown colleges use to promote and advertise job postings. We've also pivoted significantly in the wake of COVID-19 to make sure that we're also attending virtual job fairs. So we've attended Ed Weekly and Diversity in Ed, which are some national names, and also attended over a dozen of local recruitment fairs back in the spring, including Elms and Westfield State, UMass Amherst, just to make sure that our efforts haven't been halted because of some of the closures caused by COVID-19. Moving on to the next strategy of strategic recruitment initiatives, in addition to my position, we've really expanded our partnerships with HBCUs and other organizations. Prior to COVID back in February, I was able to go down to Spelman and Clark, have conversations with their education departments and actually attend their job fair. Also attended the Teacher America School Leaders of Color Conference and job fair in Las Vegas this past year. We've also increased awareness of some of the incentives we have. I'll talk more about the DESE diversification grant later, but it's a grant that we received in 2019-2020 school year for $150,000 to provide tuition assistance to aspiring educators of color. We also received a similar grant through the Nellie Mae Foundation. And we continue to go to a number of job fairs and outreach to specific underrepresented minority groups. Moving right along, particularly one of my favorite elements of this job is the Grow Your Own programs. So we continue to expand our partnership with Westfield State in the Reach to Teach program. Dr. Cheryl Stanley recently retired, so we've been working with her replacement to figure out how we can improve processes with that program. The Inspired Fellows program through the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education is a program that allows teachers to apply to serve as mentors and ambassadors in the district. So they are charged with also going to job fairs and speaking to particularly high school students who are interested in teaching. The Naviance Career Readiness data allows us to look at how students have responded to the question of, what do you want to be when you grow up? And so we target those students who identify teaching as a potential career. DESE, the Edwin report allows us as a district to actually go into the database and track students. We can actually see where our students have gone to college and follow up with them. So we see exactly where they're enrolled both locally and across the United States. And then the National Teaching Signing Day is another initiative that Commissioner Riley started last year in May. And we had at least one school participate that in May. And similar to what we do when our scholar athletes sign on to go to college for sports, very similar structure in which there is a celebration for folks who have signed on to an educator prep program in their freshman year. Aside from our student to teacher pipelines, we've also expanded our paraprofessional pipelines. We partner with Paradigm Shift, which is part of the Diverse Teacher Workforce Coalition of Western Massachusetts. So they actually provide mentoring and guidance on MTEL preparation and how do you actually navigate the systems to transition from a paraprofessional to a teacher of record. We have partnerships with Bay Pass University for paraprofessionals. And then this past 2019, we signed a new MOU with Elms College, who established a Center for Equity in Urban Education. And they recently hired on a new director as well to focus specifically on the education of aspiring Black and Brown paraprofessionals. We host a number of paraprofessional informational notes throughout the school year, previously in person, and now we're doing some virtually as well, just to share the robust offerings that we offer as a district for paraprofessionals who are interested in making the jump into a full-time teaching role. We've been able to provide MTEL reimbursement through vouchers given from the diversification grant, which means that when someone does need to take that MTEL test and pass the MTEL test, we're actually able to provide them a code that they can go on and use as a coupon so that they don't have to continue to pay out of pocket, because we know those tests can get really expensive quickly. And then also in the wake of COVID-19, DESE allowed for educators to apply for an emergency license. So we've really leveraged that to get folks into the classroom. And now we're providing supports to them as they make continuous progress towards getting a provisional license so that we can keep them in the classroom. And then just some of the other Grow Your Own programs. Again, I won't go through all of them. A few that I want to highlight. Again, Call Me Mister is a national coalition that started at Clemson University, and they're starting a chapter here in Massachusetts. So we've signed on with them. That is particularly for our Black and Brown young men who want to join the educator profession. It is a college persistence program. So once they actually get to college, they're partnered with mentors to make sure that they're finishing strong. And we have a way to recruit folks into that program as well. We've also been doing a lot of work. Assistant Superintendent Martinez invited me to join the Open Opportunity Massachusetts program, which is an advocacy group, statewide, state level. And so we meet virtually right now just to discuss different strategies to help diversify the educator workforce. So again, certainly a collaborative effort. And then some of our partnerships that we've expanded, including our work with the Empowerment Zone, the Healing Racism Institute, but particularly the Teaching Housing Project, right? We also want to make sure that Springfield is desirable and an attractive place to live. And so we've been working with the Willie Overland Lofts to ensure that affordable housing is available to educators who do want to move into Springfield to work in our district. And so to date, I know their opening date has continued to be pushed back. But last I spoke with them, we had about 8 individuals from our district who have signed leases to move into the building, and hoping to get an entire floor of teachers and educators in that building. And then in addition to our long-standing partnership with TNTP in the zone and Teach for America, we're actually partnering with Teach Western Mass, which is an alternative certification program. They do an intensive summer preparation program and then have a coaching model that's sustained throughout the school year. And so we currently have 3 Teach Western Mass residents within the district who are receiving support, all of whom are teachers of color. And we continue to provide recruitment stipends for folks who are interested in teaching in any of our critical needs positions. And we look at that on an annual basis to determine if we need to make any adjustments to ensure that we're remaining competitive. As I alluded to earlier, all of these recruitment efforts would mean very little if we also didn't focus on retention. Right? We want to make sure that once we bring in qualified individuals, we're actually keeping them. And so we've done a number of things over the past few years, including leadership opportunities. Right? We pride ourselves in being a career ladder organization. So making sure that we're promoting from within our ILSs, our effective educator coaches, always looking at competitive salaries, just to make sure that when our teachers of color are here, we keep them here and they want to continue to work in our district. And then just wrapping up the retention efforts, we've been doing a lot with DESE as well, including the Inspired Fellows program. As I mentioned, we had 10 fellows in the 2019-2020 school year. This year, they are transitioning to virtually and doing more of affinity group-based program. Our Springfield Promise Fellows, which is our partnership with American International College, we continue to attract and promote folks into that program as well. And just to summarize some of the highlights from the 2019-20 school year, and we'll get into the data in just a second, we were able to minimize the number of teacher vacancies at the start of the school year. And you'll also see the number of resignations have decreased. As I mentioned, we have joined DESE's Diversity Network, which is composed of over 30 districts within the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And so we meet with them quarterly to discuss challenges and to share successes across districts. We were selected as an Influence 100 district. We just had a meeting with them last week, similarly, to make sure that we're building leadership pipelines. In 2019-2020, we were able to double the number of paraprofessionals who did become classroom teachers. We secured $150,000 in the diversification grant through DESE that went to tuition assistance. So we're actually supporting 22 Black and Brown aspiring educators right now with up to $10,000 in tuition assistance scholarships. We are in the process of rolling out our cultural proficiency training with Dr. Khalees Warnham. All of our district administrators were participating in that program. It is now being piloted in a number of different schools. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we're in partnership with the SEA. We formed our DIRE committee, which is our Diversity, Inclusion, and Racial Equity Committee. So really thinking about how do we expand our cultural proficiency initiatives at each building and at the building level. I'm going to shift now into the actual data based on the number of strategies that we've employed, just to show how we have moved the needle forward in our efforts, and then I'll open the floor for questions. But this is our current student demographic data. This was as of earlier this month. And you'll see, again, we are a majority minority district with about 90% of our students identifying as Black, African American, or Latinx, compared to about 9% of white students. And we show that here just to give you a grounding as we go through some of the other staff demographic data. I want you to keep this in the back of your head. So starting at the highest level, our cabinet, right? So you'll see the comparison data here from 2011, 2012 to our current cabinet. And again, 2011, 2012 is when Superintendent Warwick took the helm in leading our district. The composition of the cabinet was slightly different. There were less members back then, but you'll see there an increase in the number of Black and Latinx cabinet members that we have from 2011, 2012 to present day. Moving on to our principal diversity data. Similarly, we've seen an increase from 9% to 11% in the number of Hispanic and Latinx principals that are currently employed in the district, and also a 5% increase in the number of Black and African American principals over the past 8 years. And again, this data was pulled as of the end of this summer. Our assistant principal data, which again, we all know is one of our best feeders and pipelines into becoming principals. You'll see the demographic data here on this slide. A little over 55% white, but about 45% of our assistant principals do identify as individuals of color. Nationally, for teachers, about 80% of the educator workforce does identify as white. This information has not been updated in a few years. This is back in 2017 from a national research that was done. But we like to include this just to give you an idea of what we're looking like nationally when we talk about diversification of our educator workforce. In Springfield, happy to report that this past school year for 2019-2020, 78.9% of our teachers identified as white. So we are seeing an increase in the number of diverse teachers joining the district, particularly in 2019-2020. This here is our EPIMS data. So EPIMS is the data that we have to report to DESE. And the way that EPIMS works, it's actually a look back. So on here, you'll see it says 2020, but that is actually the data that we submitted in October of 2019, which then gets reported to the state in December. So it says 2020, that information is from December of 2019. And you'll see there, EPIMS is a snapshot of a number of different groups, employee groups within our district, but it does not include custodians, bus monitors, and crossing guards. So we'll share the data of all staff diversity in a few slides, but this here includes many of our other units, including our teachers, paraprofessionals, our guidance counselors, our principals, assistant principals. And so you'll see that number there. It's slightly hard to read, but looking at 2020, 15.6% of our staff in the EPIMS report identified it as Hispanic or Latinx, 14.9% identified as Black or African American. And you'll see historically, again, an increase in the number of racially diverse individuals working in the district as reported through our EPIMS report. Comparing our district here in Springfield to some other urban gateway districts, again, you'll see this information is pulled from the DESE website, but Springfield and Holyoke certainly are following an upward trend when it comes to ensuring that our educator workforce reflects the demographics of students that I showed in the first slide compared to some of our other districts on the eastern side of the state. And then again, collectively in Massachusetts, right now about 88.9% of educators identify as white compared to, again, the 68.1% in our district. This slide here is a snapshot of the diversity data and enrollment data at a few local universities and colleges. We like to include this to say that the number of Black and Brown folks who are registering and enrolling in educator prep programs is declining and has declined significantly over the past few years. Bay Path tends to be the most diverse when it comes to folks who are enrolled in an educator prep program at these institutions, which is why our Grow Your Own programs are so important, because if we continue to just look at traditional educator prep programs, we're not going to see the influx of Black and Brown educators we need to best support our students. In this slide here, a lot of numbers on this slide, so I'll just give a really high-level overview. This is the MTEL passing rates by subject area based by race and ethnicity. And if you were to do a deep analysis of this, you will see that consistently Black and Brown educators continue to pass at a lower rate than their white counterparts. And we can go on for days as to the reason and perhaps bias in the test, but it's just to show that one of the most critical barriers in diversifying our educator workforce here in the Commonwealth and here in Springfield are the MTEL test and the barriers that that presents. So I encourage you to go back and just look at those numbers. And I know that Ms. Naylor has done a lot of work in trying to advocate for changes at the state level, as many folks in the district. But I know when I look at these numbers, it's still quite alarming, the fact that, you know, compared to their white counterparts, our aspiring Black and brown educators are, you know, not passing at a rate that they should. And then lastly, just sharing some of the demographic data of our feeders, right? We know that paraprofessionals, our goal is for as many paraprofessionals who desire to take on a classroom role to help support them. So again, this is as of August 31st, our paraprofessional data, about 25% of our paraprofessionals currently identify as Black or African American, 35% as Hispanic or Latinx, 39% as white. And just a quick note that the comparison data from 2019-2013, as you saw with our principals and assistant principals, isn't available. That's because of a change in our information systems in the HR office. So we don't have that historical data available. Substitute teachers, again, also a pool that we often tap into. Substitutes turn into long-term substitutes, who then turn into full-time classroom teachers. 38% identify as Black, 12% as Hispanic or Latinx, and less than half identify as white currently. So again, if we tap into this group as a feeder, that's more than 50% of folks who may potentially transition into a full-time teaching role. And as I mentioned earlier, the EBUMS data didn't capture everything. So this is our all staff diversity, adding those groups, custodians, bus monitors, et cetera. And so currently 63% of the entire staff in Springfield identify as white, 18% Hispanic, Latinx, and 18% Black or African American. These graphs here show the historical data of new hires by diversity each year. This is specific to new teacher hires, right? So this past year, almost half of the new teachers that we brought into the district identified as teachers of color. And again, you'll see the trends there. 2018 was a unique year for us, but 2019, you see that 57.1% of new hires were white. And again, we've seen an increase in the number of Black and Latinx educators this school year. And then finally, I started off by saying our turnover has gone down. So on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see resignations. These are voluntary resignations, folks who, for whatever reason, choose to leave the district. From 2012-13 to this year, again, we're very proud of these numbers. We want to continue to see them decrease. Again, these are various reasons why folks resign. And similarly, folks have historically been retiring at a different rate. We do wonder if the onslaught of COVID-19 has played into that slight uptick this past school year. And then our last slide here, looking back at the teacher resignations, again, of that 115 that resigned in the 2019-2020 school year, this is the racial demographic breakdown. 80% of those 115 teachers identified as white, 4.4 as Latinx, and 13.9 as Black or African American. And so with all of that information, both the strategies and the data, where do we go next? We're currently developing a plan for employee affinity spaces. As I mentioned, retention is a critical piece to recruitment. And so we want to make sure that we provide spaces for teachers of color to be able to have conversations and dialogue with folks who share an affinity group. Very, very happy and pleased to announce that we received $250,000 in diversification funds for this school year. So up about $100,000, $250,000 we will use to continue to support those 22 individuals who are currently enrolled in an educator prep program. We're also able to use some of that funding to continue to fund our partnership with Teach Western Mass, as well as develop a student to para pipeline program. This past hiring season, we rolled out to all of our principals and hiring manager anti-bias and inclusive interview strategies, in which we shared with them some best practice to ensure that the hiring committees that they're using at the building level are inclusive and that the hiring process is equitable. So we will continue to provide those resources at the building level this school year. As I mentioned earlier, we will continue to engage in cultural proficiency training with Dr. Warnham. We're in year 2 of our diversification or DESI diversity network, so continue to network with other districts. We are working internally in HR and redesigning our employee exit surveys to capture diversity and inclusion data. Not only do we want to know the demographics of folks that are leaving, but we also want to know why they're leaving. And so that's going to entail actually having one-on-one interviews and conversations with folks who do decide to resign. And then again, we will continue to expand our efforts. This is an ongoing journey, right? Cultural proficiency and equity work never ends. While we are proud of the progress that we made, we know that there's still a lot of work to be done, but look forward to continuing the great work that's happening here in Springfield. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and open it up for any questions.
Hi, Maria. I have to say thank you to the Superintendent Lydia Martinez and the team that was put together. We had a great stakeholder meeting, and all of the concerns that were presented tonight, it came out from the stakeholders from the community itself. So I have to say thank you to everyone for putting all this plan together. Not only we have a plan, but we have a plan that we are going to be working with, which is what makes me more so happy about it. And to the committee, Latonia, I know she has been working very hard when it comes to the issue that we have with diversity in our schools. So thank you so much as the chair of this committee.
Thank you, Chairwoman. May I ask, or may I also have a comment? Because I agree that a lot of effort has been really evident, not just by the data that you're showing us, but also the activity and just the engagement of the folks from the community. I think to School Committee Woman Perez's point, it is very important that it's not just us saying what we think is the issue, but that the community is involved. And so it is evident that the community is involved. And so I too appreciate all the work that you're doing, Matt, and that Melissa's doing, and Lydia and Darcia, and everyone who's involved in this great work under the leadership of our superintendent, because I think that it's one thing for us to say that we're trying to move the needle. It's another thing for us to really engage folks towards a common goal. And what I loved about it is Ms. Perez was very intent on making sure that we gathered everyone at the beginning to say, hey, let's all find out what is it that we're focused on so we'll know what our target needs to be. And so I think at this point, we definitely know what our target is. I think that we've made some progress. I think we all will acknowledge that there's a lot more work to do. But I absolutely love the idea of the program to grow our own and have students look at becoming paras, because obviously with the pipeline from paras to teachers being such a positive impact and showing to be a positive program that we have that a lot of districts have not done or don't have the ability to do because we do have such a diverse group. I think that really looking at students and pulling them in early is going to be a huge key, and really trying to flood the market a little bit more with folks that want to come back into the district and want to go into education. So I had to say that all, and then now have a question. And my question is, as you continue to think about what needs there are, right? We know money is always a need, but outside of money, what are some other things that you all look to us from school as school committee members to be advocating for and to be asking questions about when we do talk to our peers in the legislature or people at the state level, and they ask us the questions about what is it that we can do, and knowing that this issue of teacher diversity is something that everybody is talking about right now. It's very evident. The racial equity issue is something that everybody is talking about. So it's a prime opportunity for us to really be able to leverage our relationships and in this opportunity of these, I would say, storms meeting at once, right, over the past 3 to 6 months. And so with that being, you know, kind of thinking about that and kind of where we're headed as a district, I always like to have an understanding of what is it that we can do for you to help you get what you need so that you can continue to do the work that you need.
Well, if I could jump in on that, I appreciate you asking that, Latonia. Appreciate Maria's and your great leadership in this endeavor. And I think the biggest thing we can keep pushing at the legislative level, working with, and the DESE level, again, working with MASS and MASC, and I've advocated for at MASS, is this whole MTEL piece. It's clear the MTEL is the biggest obstacle we have, and DESE keeps talking about valuing diversity, but have yet to act on doing something with MTEL when the data is so alarming. So I think that would be a big thing for us to all keep pushing on, because I think that would open a lot of pathways for us forward and really do something. And the data is alarming there. So I think we have to keep the pressure on DESE to get them to not only talk about it, but actually do something about it. I know you've been advocating for that, but I think that singular focus would open up so many more opportunities for us. So that's one area I think we can, and I think the best example of a para pipeline is Darcia Milner. Darcia started as a para, became a teacher, then an assistant principal. She did a principal internship with me at Glenwood School and then became a principal, and then worked her way up to CSO. So it shows people that this pipeline actually exists. You can go all the way to the top, and she's been a great member of this team too. So I think that's a perfect example we can take to our paras and say, if you work with us on these initiatives, the opportunities are endless for you. And this whole grow your own piece we talked about is so important. Springfield people who actually come up through the system, they're going to stay with us. They're not as apt to do a year or two here to try it out and go somewhere else. They'll commit to the city and then hopefully live in the city as well. So those are a few things that I think we can focus on.
If I could just chime in for a second. Thank you, Superintendent, for that. I'm often asked to speak at the Paraprofessionals August PD, and I give my card out and I speak to a lot of paraprofessionals, and I work closely with Melissa Shea and with Matt Grimes. Oftentimes people don't know which direction to go into. So paraprofessionals are really feeling valued by SPS now. And they have friends and partners that are in the program right now. So word of mouth is great. So like the push is there, people are talking about it, they're excited about it. And, you know, COVID hit, so, you know, it stops a lot of things, but I can honestly say Matt Grimes was a phenomenal hire, and working with Melissa and Matt, Lydia and the paraprofessionals and Kathleen Mastronardi, it's been very, very effective thus far. And I'm sure we'll see a lot more paras using this pipeline.
And another good example of pipeline, and Matt made it earlier, is this whole substitute teacher. And Lydia and I started as substitute teachers growing up here in the city. So it shows you the pipeline. I think it's, that we can get people in at those levels and then move them along. It makes a big difference. But I think it's an example to folks that you can actually work your way through. So I think those examples are there, and we can seize that opportunity as well.
Yeah, Terry Montemayor was also a para. She doesn't get recognized, but she's gone on to get her degree, and look at her now. So she's another great example.
Just organized, which is really hard to do.
And I'm gonna expose her to Kathy Mastronardi, because she needs more examples. So
yeah,
go for it. Oh, Kathy knows.
Wow.
Yep.
But Latonia, we also need your support. So we're very grateful that you responded to, and Maria also, and I know Denise Hurst and Barbara Gresham to join our dire committee for the district to really bring in some of your best thoughts. And, you know, part of the group that Matt was referring to, the UMA group, that is one of the focuses that we are focusing on is the actual test. And so it's across the state. Ventura sits on one of the subcommittees also. So we're going to continue to make a lot of noise about the MTELs, and not just make noise about it, but actually presenting to the commissioner the different pathways that people can still become great teachers without having to pass a sit-down paper test that it's so hard for so many of our diverse populations to actually pass. And so we're going to continue to work that. But if you guys join our committee and bring your best thoughts, we're really going to need you guys to help us if we're truly going to make change. So we want to say thank you on behalf of that committee also. And then Superintendent and Vice Chair Collins, the dire committee has asked me to ask you, based on the conversation that was at the last school committee meeting, if there's a way that they can do a presentation to show everybody the great work that they've been doing to date. So if we need an informational item, the committee is willing to present with your permission.
Yeah, we'll get that on the agenda. Absolutely. As long as Darcia speaks.
She's a great speaker, so I agree.
She's shy, so we always have to encourage her to speak up.
Most people want me to shut up.
Never.
So I think that at this point, any other questions, concern? Are we ready to entertain a motion to adjourn? I think that the presentation of tonight gave us a lot of indication that we have a lot of work to do. We have been great at the work that we have been doing, but there's a lot of room that we need to continue doing this job. And I think the committee, thank you, Lydia Martinez, I think the committees that now are being developed will get us to that pathway, hopefully. I think we needed this start, and and I feel that we have done a lot in the small amount of time. And this pandemic has stopped a lot of things, but we have moved forward with our agenda. So the pandemic has not stopped us when it comes to the plan that we have presented tonight. So thank you, everyone. And then I think if there's no other issues, concern, or questions at the floor.
I have one thing, Ms. Perez, and it's just really the question about, I know that counselors fit into this educator category, and we're always talking about teachers. And I just want to make sure that we keep counselors on our radar, because it's extremely important that kids see folks that they feel comfortable, because they remind them of folks at home that they can open up with and share when they're going through challenges and when they need some support. And so that would be something that I would hope that we, as we're continuing to think about the teacher diversification, that we continue to talk about how do we increase recruitment of counselors of color, and making sure that we can retain them as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Latonia.
This group were all contained in the teacher slides because they're all part of Unit A. So the data you saw tonight reflects a combination of teachers and counselors because they're all in the same bargaining unit. We can always break it apart down the road and get a little more granular. And that's a good idea. We should take a look at that.
I think so. And I would also add, like, I know that you mentioned some of the programs that have been pipelines, and Springfield College of AmeriCorps has definitely been also a pipeline for the counselors and the social workers that are now counselors. A lot of them come from that program. So I think even as we continue to diversify that program at Springfield College, it will also be a help to diversifying those seats for counselors and social workers that are becoming a part of our district.
Now, those feeder programs are so important. And we've had for years feeding our counseling program. So that's crucial. If you can take a look at the composition of the feeder program, then you can really make some gains hiring from that pool.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you all.
And we'll do this presentation for you, Maria, per your request. Chris just said we'll put this on the next school committee agenda. So we'll present with Matt presenting again to the entire school committee, but we wanted to bring it through the subcommittee because you've done so much work on this first, like we hoped. So we'll get it on the agenda for you.
That would be great. That would be great. I mean that we could use this as a scale right now. I call it my scale because we have some type of measurement, you know, that the community could see where are we, what are the needs. And not only that, from the stakeholders community meeting that we held back in February, it was a need to have this like a guide. And it's in the combination of having the community stakeholders in the school committee team that we had, it made it a good, I'm looking for the proper word. It just gonna guide us to the right direction, not only with the paraprofessionals and the teachers and the principal, but all the staff in the school department as well. I think this is a great start for it. And again, thank you to the team. Now I answered.
Like you said, it's always good to start taking a look at where the data is so that we can set benchmarks moving forward.
Correct.
Clearly, Maria, when you asked to start this subcommittee, you wanted to find out where we were. You wanted to find out, to put together a blueprint of how we can get better in the future. And so the committee has really gotten right at what they said their goals were. So that's excellent. I mean, you did get a good handle on where we are, and we did get some improvement, and you have a blueprint together for it continuing to go in the future. So that was your goals when you did it, and you stayed laser focused on the goals for that committee. I'm glad to see that.
I think this is the phase 3 of the report. I always call it phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. And now we are creating the phase 4, which it means having more room to do some more investigation and putting some more research and resources together. So yeah, I thank the committee because if we wouldn't been with the committee and you guys, we wouldn't have now moved forward and stay focused in attaining the goals that we wanted to attain with this report. Any other questions?
No, I'd just like to make one more comment. Having Matt day to day pushing this forward has made a difference in the system. Since taking over that position, he's just been on this relentlessly, analytically, and really has made a difference. So just want to thank Matt and thank the whole team because it's going to take all of us to move this forward. But I just wanted to tip my cap to Matt because he's done an incredible job.
So I think at this time I entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second by Ms. Nelly. Could we take the attendance, please?
Sure. Ms. Perez? Can you hear me?
Her voice isn't quite working.
Oh, okay. Ms. Perez?
Yes.
Ms. Hurst absent, and Ms. Naylor?
Yes.
Excellent.